My name is Kenyatta Benari, and I am the chair of the Applied Linguistics department. For those of you who are not our students and you don't know what we're doing, we offer a master's in ESL, bilingual and foreign language studies, a PhD in Applied Linguistics, a dual language certificate, and a path to ESL licensure. And soon also a licensure in French. Before anything, I would like to thank our two amazing doctoral students, Juan David Gutierrez and Jesse Rubio. They have poured tons of time and energy and enthusiasm in organizing this event and making it a success at the expense of writing their papers, maybe, for a midterm. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I also want to thank all of my lovely colleagues who are here today, and they're the strongest supporters of our events. It's always a collective effort to, make something like that happen, so thank you. Today's talk is...
Jesse.
I'm sorry?
Jesse, too.
Yeah, I thank Jesse.
Yes.
Solo viste tu nombre. Today's talk is part of the department's annual lecture series. We invite speakers who anchor their research in social reality and who strive to intervene and change the world and education in addition to their disciplinary field. These discussions about social change are now more important than ever in the current political climate, where we have on one hand a populist resurrection and a full-fledged neoliberal offensive, and on the other hand different movements trying to lay claims, yeah, that helps, for social, racial, gender equality and redistribution of wealth and power. So activism and political engagement in this context is not simply an option, it is a duty. One should not look no further than what's going on the last 3 years with massive teacher mobilizations as great examples that illustrate what can be done through massive mobilized struggle. And our speaker today is no stranger to teacher mobilizations, a former high school teacher and professor of education at the University of Washington, Bothell. He has been part of, in solidarity with, and writing about educator struggles. He is the author of Unequal by Design, High-Stakes Testing and the Standardization of Inequality, Critical Curriculum Studies, Education Consciousness and the Politics of Knowing, and the more recent Marxist Education, Learning to Change the World. And he's also the co-editor with Michael Apple and Gandin of the Routledge International Handbook of Critical Education. This is just to mention a few of his publications. I first got to know his work through Rethinking Schools. This is a social justice education network and a journal that he helps edit. Their most recent publication, Teaching for Black Lives, includes teaching practices and activities from around the country to affirm the lives, lived experiences, and histories of Black students in our schools. Professor Au is recognized nationally and internationally as a scholar of social justice in education. His 2009 book, Unequal by Design, set the stage to problematize the use of standardized testing for evaluating learning and teaching, and he has also contributed greatly to the discussion about public funding and charter schools. We are thrilled to have him here with us today. We want to thank him, and please join me in welcoming him.
Good evening-ish, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm realizing I don't spend much time in Boston, so I don't get a chance to come out here very much. This is really good. So today I'm just gonna, it'll be doing more of a sort of activist talk, and this is not going to be sort of like a hardcore, like scholarly, high theory conversation, although there will be a little bit of theory. And really, I just want to focus on trying to think through sort of what does it mean in real concrete terms, and the kind of work when we take up this idea of racial justice and sort of in this current context pushing back against white supremacy in schools. Hopefully my battery's dead. All right. So as I go into this, I just want to lay a little bit of groundwork, right? So I'm going to be talking about racial justice and white supremacy, but I want to be clear that we don't think about it purely on sort of this axis of just race. all right? Just because I think particularly now we get to see it with the rise of the alt-right and sort of fascistic trends in the U.S. Currently in terms of white supremacists. Got to understand, have to take white supremacy as being wrapped up in a few different things, including nationalism and nation state, right? Which then has implications for folks' status as immigrants and quote unquote citizenship, right? Citizenship just being mainly the whole idea that you have official status with the state. And so when we're dealing with white supremacy, we're also it gets wrapped up then in how folks are seeing themselves against immigrants, right, or against people without papers. It's also wrapped up in toxic masculinity and patriarchy and gender and sexuality, right? This kind of whole big mess of things, because as we see with the protests of the white nationalists, it isn't just about race for them, right? There's particular ways around violence and presentation and toughness and defending America, right? It starts to get wrapped up in all this other stuff as well, and you'll see with the homophobia that comes out of that as well. I mean, so when I think white supremacy, I think carries this with it as well. And then obviously religion, right? Christianity is wrapped up with white supremacy and white nationalism in the United States, and so folks who are not Christian are under attack, and Muslims in particular are a particular target. And then also it's connected to the political economy of capitalism, right? This focus on hyper-individualism and anti-socialism, right? I mean, I think it's important to see when Trump, has to declare in his last State of the Union, we will never be a socialist country, right? He's worried about it, and he's trying to signal that if you're going to be down with him and his idea of sort of white nationalism, then you're pro-capitalism and you're against any kind of socialist ideas and ideology. And then, of course, in order to maintain all that, there's also gets wrapped up with imperialism and war. Okay, so to me the imperialism war part is really ends up being the expression of international violence related to these things, right? To the nationalism and the toxic masculinity, but all done with the interests of U.S. capitalism and capitalist interests being maintained abroad, right? Okay, so I'm going to start with a story. So if you've read some of my work in Teaching for Black Lives, you know this story a little bit. This is a picture of my son's elementary school. This is John Muir Elementary School in South Seattle. It's a wonderful staff, and this school serves roughly about it's about 69-70% free and reduced lunch, if we want to use that as at least as an imperfect marker of poverty. It is about 50% Black African immigrant population. My guess, I don't have the stats, but I would say there's probably at least like a 25%, maybe 30% Muslim student population in the school as well. And then it's a mix of families. The neighborhood itself is sort of on the edge of it's a very interesting neighborhood where we live. Literally, if you go sort of one block west and one block south, you're in Rainier Valley, and that's sort of considered like the hood. But if you go one block east, one block north, you're up in like multi-million-dollar houses up on a hill in the Mount Baker neighborhood, right? So the school, although a lot of the white affluent parents choose to send their kids to private schools, we do have a lot of folks who a lot of those kids also come to this school as well. So it's a real mix of the neighborhood. And I want to highlight here a couple folks. This is Deshaun Jackson. He is a paraprofessional at the school support, student support worker, and also Julie Trout, who's the art teacher at John Muir. And John Muir has been interesting. The school has been interesting because they've had at least a stated commitment and done some work around sort of trying to think through what it means to do racial justice work at their school for a number of years now. And so they've been devoting professional development time in some cases to like dealing with white privilege. I want to be clear, I don't want to romanticize it. It's like it hasn't been necessarily like the greatest work in the world, and they're not suddenly like it's not like the most woke school in the nation, right? We don't want to, but there's something happening there where folks are thinking about this stuff and wanting to do some of this work. So Deshaun Jackson wanted to do something to sort of kind of shift the discussion around the education of Black boys in particular. And so he decided to do a day that he was calling, 100 black men changing the narrative in education, right? And so the idea was to get 100 black men to come to the school and line up along the sidewalk and celebrate the kids coming into the school, giving high fives and things like that, right? I would, not the most like radical, like life-changing, it's not gonna end racism in the schools or anything gesture, but it's also an important symbolic effort, I think. And so in response to Deshaun wanting to do that, the school staff had a discussion, and the other teachers want to figure out how to work in solidarity with this movement, and particularly because there's basically no full-time teachers are black men at the school, and so they're like, we're not black men, so how do we work in solidarity with this? And so they decided to develop a T-shirt, all right, and teachers they can wear. Let's see, I think it's the next picture. Okay, and so Julie Trout, who's a very good, supportive white ally, and she's very race conscious in her allyship, and she's just an amazing art teacher. And so she developed the T-shirt, and then the school decided to wear these T-shirts in solidarity on this day. And then, wait, well, I'll go there. Okay. And then it got leaked to local news. Okay. And then from local news, then once it got on the local news, and we don't even know who leaked it. I've never been able to figure this out. It got leaked to local news. They did a story on it, and then Breitbart and Blue Lives Matter picked up the story. Okay. And as you can imagine, like shit blew up from there, right? There's no easier way. There's no better way to put it. And so there was a threat online. Someone made a bomb threat on my son's school because the teacher's going to wear these T-shirts. Okay, and I always ask audiences to really sit on that for a moment, right? Somebody out there was willing to make a death threat against a bunch of working class black and brown kids from the ages of 5 to 12, right? And what does that really mean? Like who's like where do you have to be in that space to really make that threat? So the threat was made, and what happened was officially the Seattle School District canceled the event. Okay, and there's a lot of details around that, but what happened was, they made plans. This is interesting to me. Like they canceled the event because of the threat. But they didn't close school for the day. And I was trying to figure out, if you have a credible threat, why would you not just close the school? That's what I was trying to figure out. So they cut the difference. And so there's still some buckiness there. But what happened then was, officially it was canceled, but we actually were like, you know what? We're going to do it anyways, right? Who cares what the district says? And so we did it. Okay. Now it's shifted, of course. We didn't get 100 black men out there, right? But this was a really amazing and beautiful morning, okay? Because there was drummers out there, people were singing. It was like a party, okay? Because honestly, it's like we made a conscious choice to just say, hey, you all made this threat, you assholes threatened our kids. And you know what? We're going to go ahead and make this statement anyways. Okay. Yeah, it was just a beautiful, amazing morning, and it really showed, I think, the resilience. But now I want to be clear. Like they cleared out the school that morning at 4 a.m. They brought in bomb-sniffing dogs, right? And they cleared out. They checked the school. They had increased police presence. Okay. So in that regard, I was glad they took precautions, because you just don't know, especially these days. We just don't know. But yeah, we did it anyways, and I was proud of folks for just standing up, both to the district and then also to the white supremacist folks making these threats on our kids and school. So, but this is the context that we're dealing with now. Okay, and so I'm going to show a couple things. Now, what's happening in Muir is a good example of folks trying to do some of this work and trying to move the conversation on racial justice. But I don't want to let schools off the hook entirely. So I'm a public school advocate. I'm a public school teacher. My kids in public school. I fight against charters. That's where I am. But I'm a critical friend. And so I want to be clear that there's things that public school teachers, and if we're dealing with racial justice, that we really have to deal with, all right? So again, thinking about the context and where we're at these days. So now I'm going to move to, we'll get back to Muir at the end. But a couple examples of some of the ways that teachers who need to be doing some more of this work on racial justice need to be improving, especially in this context. I don't know if you remember the Day Without Immigrants that happened now going back, was it almost, I guess almost 2 years ago, I think. But a bunch of teachers got busted for the stuff they were tweeting about the Day Without Immigrants, okay? And so here's a couple quotes from some teachers saying, that's what you get when you jump on some sort of bandwagon cause, excuse to be lazy and or get drunk. Best school day ever. We talk about stereotypes of like Mexican Americans coming out in this. Quieter classes, more productive. Let's do this more often. Small classes, troublemakers were gone. Fantastic day. Like, there's still a need to do this work. I mean, Muir is doing some good stuff. They're not perfect, but we also have public school teachers running around with this kind of garbage as well. Naples, Florida teacher. The funny part about immigrants staying home is the rest of us who pay for them are here at work like we've always been. Right, we're like the whole thing about taxpayers paying for quote-unquote illegal immigrants, right? Looks like less mouths to feed today. Have fun while you still can. So glad to hear about massive deportation. Let's make America great again. Thanks, Donald Trump. God, you like, is this person teaching my kid? Here in my own state, a first grade teacher in Prosser. It's in eastern Washington. That's the other side of the mountains from Seattle. Is very much like, sort of like, you know, California's sort of two Californias. Seattle's kind of like that, like Washington's like that too. We have everyone west of the mountains on the I-5 corridor, and then you have the mountains, and then you have very conservative east side of Seattle. This is from the east side of Washington. This is a great idea. It really narrows the search down. And then if you want to report illegal aliens, please call ICE. Gives the number. All this stuff. If this offended you in any way, do me a favor and unfriend my American ass. Sure thing. This is going viral on my daughter's Snapchat. Trump all the way. Okay. But this is in a community, in a school, right, that is like at least 50% Latinx students. Okay. And then this was in a New Jersey classroom. Some kids were speaking Spanish, and this teacher, started like going off on them and telling them they had to speak American. And the kids got this was caught on video. I don't know if you remember when this happened about almost a year and a half ago. Got caught on video, and this kids had to walk out and protested this teacher sort of doing this quote-unquote speak American thing to them. But it's not just in the teachers. We also have stuff in curriculum as well. And let me start by thanking Jesse Agopian, my good friend and co-editor, fellow activist and Rethinking Schools person as well. These next slides are from his presentation around Black Lives Matter stuff, and I wanted to sort of use them as examples, so I want to make sure he gets credit. And so one of the things Jesse likes to highlight is, and this we all know, right? Textbooks. Okay, and so a couple things to look at, a couple examples from textbooks around the racial injustice in schools. Students were asked how were slaves treated in Connecticut, and the student had written this, right? Slaves were treated badly and cruelly, were treated like animals and goods, and then they crossed that out. Slaves were treated like members of the family. Okay. And then let's see, what was unique about some African Americans in the colony? What was unique was that they could buy land and be free, circled, and start businesses and could be married there, and then they are free, circled that. Okay. And what happened was the mom saw the first answer and was like, how can you cross this out? Right, that's the right answer, you know? And then you look in the textbook, and here's what the textbook answer says, right? Connecticut didn't have many slaves. Some people owned 1 or 2 slaves. They often cared for and protected them like members of the family. They taught them to be Christian and sometimes to read and write. Thank you, Connecticut white people, right? You saved those black slaves, you know? Yeah, so this becomes the right answer, right? In fact, we were talking in the car yesterday about in one of the rides I was just thinking through the New England context for these kinds of conversations, because the colonial history is such. I mean, I lived in Connecticut for 4.5 years and went to middle school there, right? And it gave me a sense of like this colonial thing, and I know that's and it's the colonial North versus the South, right? And we didn't have slaves here, like that's those Southerners, right? Those backward Southerners. We're the North, where abolitionists were, and we're free, right? And so And so then you get this kind of stuff, like you can see how this mythology, you know, it's really an example of hegemony in play, right? How this mythology just gets created for kids doing this. Another example, a work example. This was a worksheet, The Life of a Slave's A Balanced View, right? And so on the left side is positive aspects. It's a little fuzzy, I know. Right side is negative aspects. So this kid got the answer right. Just an NA for positive aspects of slavery. But the fact that you get asked that's why one of the things that drives, you know, I'm a little bit in social studies education. That's one of the things that drives you crazy about the conversations of social studies education, is because there's all these things about, well, you have to tell multiple perspectives on both sides. And I know, I'm like, wait, where do the boundaries of both sides, where does that begin and end? You know, because I feel like these things are so relative, and like, do you really want someone to do both sides of slavery, right? Especially for the enslaved, right? I mean, it's ridiculous. This is a Prentice Hall history textbook, one that was actually even in the book room at Garfield High School in Seattle when Jesse went to go look for it this year. Okay, and talks about how many slaves may not have been terribly unhappy. Right? Although killing and maiming were against the law in every state, there were kind and generous owners, right? And the institution of slavery was as complex as the people involved. Well, most slaves were whipped at some point. A few never felt the lash. Nor did all slaves work in the fields. Some were house servants or skilled artisans. Yeah, they may not have been terribly unhappy, but certainly others weren't happy, as the Nat Turner revolt revealed. So it's like, you know, it leaves me speech. So when we think about like how this stuff is perpetuated and it's ongoing in terms of the racial injustice we're seeing in schools, and the kinds of things that the teachers at Muir have been trying to figure out how to push against when they got attacked. All right, and then, you know, just to keep things real in terms of and up to date. I mean, of course, we're obviously dealing with this right now, right? With Ilhan Omar coming under attack and by the Democrats and Republicans. This was the poster that was put up at the West Virginia Capitol, like in a display for the Republican Party. They put this up, and no Democrats spoke out against this. And now they're trying to figure out how to attack and rebuke her for her statements around Israel and her questioning the attack and stuff, right? But this is, again, context and the way these politics get played out in our lives. And just because it just happened, I feel like I had to say something too, right? You know, so Stephon Clark, who was shot in the back, thinking about Black Lives Matter and racial justice, Stephon Clark had a cell phone in his yard in Sacramento, in his own yard, and he was shot in the back multiple times by the police. Okay, in his own yard, holding his own cell phone, right? You know, and so this is the context. This is the times that we're dealing with for folks, and it's ongoing. You know, we had that big push around the National Black Lives Matter movement and the stuff happening in Seattle with what happened in my son's school. There's this stuff happening nationally, but you know, and here this was just, you know, this last week we had the ruling come down around this, right? So these things aren't ending, and the work is still continuing. And I also want to say this about not being romantic about all this, because it's not like the work that's happening that I'm going to talk about is solving this stuff. But I do think we are making some strides. There has been some research on what's going on in terms of schools, right? This SPLC came out with this report on the Trump effect and the presidential campaign on schools and how that impacted kids. Interesting study. You could guess what findings were, and I'll talk about those in a minute. And I'm thinking again, because, you know, we're about to start another ramp up and round of elections again, and so things are going to get ramped up again. I think we need to be ready for that. Also, this study from the UCLA's Institute for Democracy, Education, and Access, okay, about sort of the stress and hostility folks have been feeling in schools since the election. But just some of those things, what it means right now, right? We've had ICE arresting parents in proximity of schools and churches. And this is what I think about, my kids, not my kids, but I call them my kids, whatever, the kids at my son's school, right? Like these are the things they're thinking about. You know, one of my son's best friends at school, like, you know, his uncle had gotten picked up, right? So parents and grandparents getting arrested by ICE, kids are getting scared for themselves and their families and their friends and their communities. There's been research, you know, in the research, you know, teachers are reporting that children have been crying in classrooms because of their fears for what's going on for themselves and their families. On top of all that, we're having like the policy threats to special education, free lunch programs, after-school programs, public school funding, Title IX, special education, the attacks on transgender student rights. Like, we have all these things kind of coming down on kids, both inside the schools in terms of policy, and then outside of schools in terms of the more broader sort of public push on things. The other thing other stuff that's coming out from the research, and this data is a little bit old, but just after the election, and we see like all these increased attacks on folks, you know, and then also like good old Americans having a hard time distinguishing between Sikhs and other folks, other brown folks, and just, you know, calling them Arabs and Iranian. I mean, whatever, like all just hate speech, right, and attacks, and you can't even call them microaggressions. These are like literally attacks on folks. There was a 2018 California Department of Justice report too that talked about rises in hate crimes in 2017, and this was the data. This is the overall data that they found, right? 17.4% rise in hate crimes in 2017 in California. And then part of it then is to, like, I want folks to think about, I want teachers and educators really think about, like, what does it mean to be an immigrant and a Muslim in this context right now? With all this shit going on, right? Like, what does it mean to really sit in that, okay? And we need to be thinking about that for, like, these are the folks we're educating teachers to go teach, and these are the students that we work with in schools, okay? These are their parents and their communities, right? And I think if we're going to be sort of thinking about what it means to be poised to do the work for social justice, for racial justice, then we need to be really like, we want to take that viewpoint, that standpoint in mind, right? And there's other standpoints we could take, but this is where I think a lot of the tension happens now. And also shout out to Arshad, who's in the room. If you want to see, he's got a great piece from 2017 around that from his research on talking with Muslim parents and students around the country, and sort of how are they experiencing things in education right now. But even though I'm talking about Trump and, you know, naming it as Trump, I just want to be clear. All of this stuff and these fears, like it's not just Trump, okay? I mean, it existed under Obama as well, all right? And I want to be clear, I don't think Obama had the greatest immigration policies ever as well, right? There's a lot of things that Trump's enacting now that actually the Obama administration, in terms of immigration policy, the Obama administration actually laid the foundations for and the groundwork for, and then he's sort of taking it to an even further extreme. So we can't let's not like white supremacy and all this racism and all this garbage obviously predated Trump, right? But in some ways, Trump sort of signals what does it mean to normalize this way of being in the world, okay, and have it be justified, right? I mean, it's like it's kind of depressing every day. Like you get something new out of the Senate, and some senator or some state or federal politician says some new idiotic thing just about every day these days. But it's more about how they enter into the mainstream, okay, and just get normalized. But it's also not just these far right folks, okay? I live in Seattle. We are home of lattes and Starbucks and Amazon and Microsoft and, you know, all that kind of good stuff. So after some of the Black Lives Matter work in Seattle schools had been going on, someone at KUOW, one of our local stations, did some research and did a FOIA request for for emails from parents around Black Lives Matter, and so it actually found that some of the white parents in the more affluent North Seattle, mostly white schools, actually didn't like the Black Lives Matter work that was going on in the district, right? And so, this is from Laura Hurston Elementary. Parents saying, well, what about red and black, or yellow and white and black? How does supporting Black Lives Matter help that gap? And can you please address why skin color is so important? I remember a guy that had a dream. You love that, like liberals just like, we're going to whip out Martin Luther King, the individualist, the individualist version. Why skin color is so important? I remember a guy that had a dream. Do you remember that too? I doubt it. Please show me the content of your character if you do, right? Just ridiculous. But so one thing that the racial justice work in Seattle has sort of shown me is that, you know, like the resistance from like the alt-right folks or the like that's easy to name and see and fight against because it's out there. But then you get to like liberal Seattle, which is getting wider and more gentrified by the minute, right? And then like how do we work for equity with these parents from these communities who, like, if you ask them, they're like, yeah, I'm about racial justice, I'm down, right? Like they would, I'm not racist, right? They might even say I don't see color, right? Like you get those answers. But how do we take that step? So while we're on Martin Luther King, I decided to pull out my own Martin Luther King quote just because it was too. Because he's speaking directly to that parent. Okay? So here's Dr. King on the white moderate, which I think is a really important quote from a letter to Birmingham jail. This is one, it's a long quote, so I broke it off to 3 slides. I didn't feel like having it all squished, right? King says, first, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the White Citizens Council or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice. The white moderate who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for, quote, a more convenient season. The white moderate, whose shallow understanding from people of goodwill, is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. And I suspect you all, like in the Boston area, must deal with a fair amount of this as well, right? I think you get to a lot of these quote-unquote progressive cities. I was taught at Berkeley High School in Berkeley, California for a few years as well, and saw this all the time. If we try to do, and this is, it's Berkeley, right? And it's like, yeah, Berkeley. We tried, I remember Berkeley, for reasons of racial and class justice, we tried to detrack 9th grade English in that school. And if you want to stir up the white liberal parents, just try and detrack something. Get rid of tracking, right? They will come out in droves, right? Doesn't matter for what reason you want to do it. Like, it's all, we know what tracking does, right? It always reproduces race and class inequalities. No matter how you want to brush, like however you want to paint it, you try to put lipstick on that pig. That's always what it does, right? And those parents came out and just crushed us. They're powerful parents. They're lawyers. They're doctors. They have money. And they're like, don't you dare mess up my kid's chance to get into Brown by detracking these classes, right? And you're messing up their chance at maintaining their class status and their mobility. Always see that all the time. Happens in Seattle. And so it's been a big issue for us in Seattle around the race justice work. Is sort of like coming up against not just parents like that, but a lot of teachers like this. I was, for a while there, I was working really, really closely with my son's school on the racial justice work. I was doing professional development trainings with them, right? And I saw so much performative wokeness from white teachers being like, yeah, like, this is what I'm about. I'm down with this, right? But then I knew better because my son was in their classes, and I knew that this same teacher that was telling me how committed to racial justice they were was also the same teacher that was kicking black kids out of her class every day, right? And so but when I got, like, how do you move past that, right? And that's really, really difficult. I don't have that answer, by the way. So a couple questions to think about, and this is the easier question, right? Can you teach students in a supportive, caring, and effective manner if you're fundamentally opposed to some aspect of their identity? Right? Of course, the obvious answer is no. Right? The other way this gets put is it good enough to hate the sin but love the sinner? Right? And I've dealt with this. I was in a teacher education class with a rampant homophobe who wanted to become a teacher, right? But to him it was about lifestyle, and he wanted like quote unquote lifestyle. Sorry, it was all about, you know, well, don't you want to counsel kids away from a dangerous lifestyle, right? You know, and it was never so. And he always had this line about, well, you know, he could teach the kid, right? Even while he hates the sin that they're committing in his eyes. Okay. So yes. So this, I mean, this question is easy though. We know that. I'm assuming in this room we know the answer. But you know, I hate to even have to ask that sometimes, because I feel like we still get folks in our teacher ed programs who do hold on to, like, they're holding on to one of these hardcore prejudices, and it's like honestly, like, well, don't be a teacher. Like, just get your ass out the door. We don't need you, right? We don't need you. Oh, sorry. So the harder question though is this, right? Can you be that teacher? Can you teach students in a truly supportive, caring, and effective manner if you're unwilling to critically analyze the ways that you, as a teacher, are willingly and unwillingly playing a role in your students' oppression? And this is the one, in fact, I've had some conversations with doc students today about this. Who was it? Someone asked me, how do you move the white teacher to wokeness, right? You know, or the other way to put it, and using Martin Luther King's Dr. King's words, right? Is it good enough just to be the white moderate teacher, right? I'm well-intentioned, and I think I'm for this, but I'm not willing to disrupt things, right? I'm not willing to push it that far. And this one is, I struggle with it. I mean, I know the answer is no, it's not good enough, right? But I feel like in my work, on racial justice work in Seattle schools, and elsewhere actually, in around Seattle, I feel like it's been so hard, it feels impossible at times, to move these sort of liberal white teachers past this. Right? How do I get them to move into a space where they're really willing to engage in like understanding themselves as white people, and understand white supremacy in that context, and what their role as allies needs to be, right? And then how does that manifest concretely in their teaching? It's been really, really difficult. Oh, yeah, this one. I'm gonna skip this. Okay. And yeah, this is just my plea, right? Just don't teach. I already said that. And then, honestly, this, I still see the hubris and sort of white saviorism happening all the time when I talk to my young future teachers, right? A little bit less so at my current university. And I'm gonna take a little tangent, but it's important because, we have all sorts of folks giving us answers for racial justice in schools, right? And here in Massachusetts, it's no different than anywhere else. We get all kinds of answers, right? And usually it's testing in charter schools and Teach for America and Broad Foundation and Gates and personalized learning, right? And computers, right? That's going to save us. So we'll take a little test. So who said this? Education is the great civil rights issue of our time. Well, and I'm doing this because all these folks have something in common, and they all end up pushing the same reforms. Okay, this is Bush from 2002. Close.
I had Reagan.
Who said this?
Reagan.
And I'm doing this because you see this tie between education and racial justice, right? There's always been a discursive tie for the rhetorics around why we push these reforms.
Clinton, yeah.
Rod Page. He's Bush's Secretary of Education. So far, you're all failing. I like standardized tests. Education is the civil rights movement of our generation. Who said this? I just throw it out.
Keep answering.
Artie Duncan.
You'll get it.
Artie Duncan, 2011. Who said this? Education is the civil rights issue of our time. You think he has the same speechwriter for all of them? Obama, 2011.
Right.
You got it right. Yeah, yay!
We have a winner. Finally won.
Education is the civil rights movement of our day.
Donald Trump Betsy DeVos.
Betsy DeVos, yeah.
Condoleezza Rice, Secretary of State, former Secretary of State. And then finally, education civil rights of our time, again, Donald Trump. So there's this whole thing around the rhetorics of equality and achievement that is wrapped around race. That's why they're tying it, racial justice, that's why they're tying it, education reform, to the civil rights movement, right? And this whole, basically a sort of a mythical legacy of the civil rights movement and racial justice. Of course, their version of the civil rights movement is not the real version of the civil rights movement, right? That was like way more radical than anything they wanted, just like their version of Dr. King does not align with the real Dr. King, who was way more radical than how these folks view it. Okay. And so for racial justice, what all these folks say, well, what do they want? Like I just said, they want testing, right? So Bush used that. He wrote that to No Child Left Behind. Even in No Child Left Behind's naming, No Child Left Behind, right? We have achievement gaps in education. We can't leave these poor black and brown kids behind. They all need to be tested, and schools have to be held accountable to raise test scores. That's how we're going to achieve racial equality in schools. That's the whole premise of it. And that's all we get. Well, since then, it's just been regurgitated by whatever administration you want. Every Child Succeeds Act. Every Child Succeeds Act. It's the same shit, right? Just different brand. And so because I'm here in Massachusetts, I wanted to talk a little about high-stakes testing in charter schools. They are incapable of achieving racial justice. Incapable. Okay? So standardized tests, just real brief. I'm just taking a little side trip just because I had to, because I'm here. Standardized testing is just rooted in eugenics and white supremacy. It has been from its origins. Okay? Go back to the beginnings of standardized tests in this country, the origins of the SAT. Okay, these guys were known eugenicists. Yerkes, Terman, Lewis, right? All these psychologists, okay? They all had all these totally racist notions about Mexican Americans and black folks and Native Americans. It's ridiculous, okay? But you might say, well, that's in the past. That's 100 years ago, right? Well, all the tests are now designed to literally just sort populations, all right? This is something, so the grad students in here read my Marxism book, and so I talk about this in the chapter on testing. But, you know, all these, like a test is only, just so you know, a test is only considered good and valid if it produces a bell curve of results. That means some passing, a bunch in the middle, and then a bunch failing at the end. Okay? Even, now people say, well, what about the Common Core test? Are you guys a Smarter Balanced or a Park State? Park. Even for that kind of test, right? Even if you're talking about a criterion reference test, right? Guess what they do with the results? So theoretically, a criterion reference test, where you're measuring against a standard, you could say, well, everyone can meet standard, right? But guess what they do with the raw data? They put it on a bell curve to report the results, okay? Because it's only considered a good test if it can show you who's passing and failing, and not everyone can pass a test if it's going to be a good test. What happens if everyone passes? You have two options.
Raise them.
No, well, you raise it. Oh, that's not. The test isn't hard enough. That's number one, right? Or what's the other option? What's the other explanation? Somebody cheated, right? Okay. So they're only made to sort populations. You'll never get racial equality with that. At best, you will get this is what closing the achievement gap means that no one gets. Everyone says closing the achievement gap. Yay, we're gonna have everyone be racially equal. No, closing the achievement gap actually means proportionate passing and failure for every group. That just means having the same number of black kids pass and fail as having the same number of white kids pass and fail. It does not mean everyone passes, right? It's the same number of rich kids passing and failing as the same number of poor kids passing and failing. That's what closing the achievement gap is. We also know what they produce. The data they produce just reflects factors outside of school. You know, every major study we have finds that test scores actually are usually about, you know, maybe 60 to 8, somewhere between 60 to 80% based on non-school factors. All right. We know that the data is used to punish working class and black and brown communities as well. So you take an unequal test these communities, create the failure, and then you get to experiment on them all you want. Right. And then the data gets used to justify deregulation, attacks on unions, financialization of public education, trying to turn financialization meaning trying to turn public education, a public enterprise, into a financial market. It's where you can make money, right? Because in this case, if the regular schools can't do it, then you need to have a market function that can fix it in the logics of the reforms. And then you get the market solutions, like charters, okay? Market solutions in general have never served the ends of racial justice, ever, right? And charters are part of this, part of the union busting, part of the competition, part of the siphoning monies away from public schools. And before anybody says to me right now, but I know of a good charter school that's community-based, right? And you may be right, and that may be a wonderful, badass charter school. And maybe it has unionized teachers even. It's possible. I know there's a few unicorns out there, right? I just want to say, because I hear it all the time, and I get it, but I also want to say we have to be clear about not substituting the individual example for what the charter movement is as a whole. And the charter movement is funded by the billionaires who want to take apart public education, straight up. And until the community charters start speaking out publicly against that charter school movement, I'm not hearing it. But they need to be public about how they're doing this work. If you want to see a deeper explanation of this, check out chapter 4 of my book, and then also Ricardo's book. Ricardo's here too. Shout out to Ricardo in the back somewhere. Rosa, Capitalism's Educational Catastrophe also has a good resource on this stuff. So in the midst of all that, those corporate reforms, the context, Trump, all this stuff, okay? Multicultural education is important, but in the face of this violence, I mean, this is violence, right? Sometimes it's physical, but it's also cultural violence, racial violence. It's just, I mean, it's literally violence against our beings, right? Our bodies. Against the violence, in the face of the violence being visited on so many of our students and communities, it's, multicultural education is just not enough. We have to defend our children and their parents and our schools. We need to fight against white supremacy. We need to be activist educators, but we also need to be supporting student activism and parent activism along the way as well. Oh, in other words, we can do this too. Here's some kids doing that. This is for the cover shot. I had this too. The context for this is that outside of Portland, Oregon, in the suburbs, there's like Hillsborough and a few different suburbs out there. Some white kids put up a "Build the Wall" Trump poster in a student assembly, and then the students, there was massive protests erupted around that. But what was beautiful about this, and here's a couple more shots. What was beautiful about this was that it didn't just stay at this one school. Like neighboring, like it got out on like Twitter, or probably Insta. Twitter's probably too old for these kids. Got on Instagram or something, and it started to spread. And so then like local high schools around started joining the protests, right? And then it spread into Portland too, right? And the college students at Portland State came out, and there was a big rally in Portland. So it became this really huge thing of students like just saying screw it, and they had walked out. I think the thing that's amazing to me right now is that like the precariousness of our public schools in the sense of, I don't think the powers that be, and certainly the students don't know how quickly and easily our students could just shut it all down if they decided to. Do you imagine that? Like the students are way more powerful than they know, and certainly the powers that be I don't think really know that. They could just shut it all down. Imagine a national student movement in this country. Even just the high schools, it's good enough. They could shut it down, That's why I love this stuff. There's so much power. Just to dip into theory a little bit, and not very deeply. Part of this is a discussion of how do we think and understand schools and social reproduction. So a lot of the grad students in here are probably playing in these waters and sort of the reading and stuff you're doing. And so just so you know, part of the argument I'm making is that, yes, we have schools being part of this broad project of social, cultural, economic reproduction in this country, right? Continually reproducing inequalities. But at the same time, hidden in this is that actually schools can also be sites of organizing and actually resistance to that very same process. And that's part of the dialectical contradiction of schooling itself. and like the reality of what it is. If you want more detail, you could. I talk about the history and I'm not trying to say by. If you just want to read up on the literature, like it's summarized in there. I'm not trying to say I'm the one who's established this. This has been long talk in critical education for going on 40, 50 years now. So, but I summarized a lot of the arguments from those other scholars and the history of it in that chapter. But the space is there, and I think that's what keeps a lot of us here, right? I mean, I work for a university, right? I know what universities are. I'm not romantic about it, you know. But why do I stay? Well, I get to do this kind of work, right? At least until Bill Gates tries to fire me. We're going till 6:30 total, or we'll have some space for questions after?
Yeah, it would be nice to have
Yeah.
some.
Yeah, so here I'm gonna, let me see. Just to be mindful of time. This is just a quick summary of how, so rethinking schools around, and who I work with, nonprofit out of Milwaukee, and how we sort of think through sort of racial justice and justice in education generally. These are our tenets that we put out. Okay, this is half of them. I got the next slide. Is there? Okay, and you see a sort of Freirean nods, dialogue, supporting students' identities, home language, very straight up language. Really, what this is like for those of you with questions about how do I approach this. Like if you're a K-12 classroom teacher and you're in the classroom every day, how do I approach this? Like this is it. It's grounded. It's easy. This is what you do. I would say it's easy. Let me take that out. But this is what you do. It's hard work. Here's the other half of it too. And you can tell who the audience is for. I hate the word rigor. Hate it. Right? Mainly because it just means like more work. You know, work harder and faster. But we put this in there because we're trying to think about audience, right? If we're trying to pitch to teachers to move in this direction, want them to understand, and we want to make the argument that, you know, if you're really going to be a strong teacher that has some sense of rigor around student learning, then you need to include this kind of work in that. And we can't always just be like we have the critique event. We want to you know, critique of Eurocentric school knowledge, but we also want to celebrate social movements and the fights against this stuff as well as part of it. But it's really largely an audience issue. But this is how we really sort of put it out for folks. Fundamentally, I just want to say that's all just groundwork because I think we just need to be like I said, creating activists, right? Both amongst educators and amongst students and parents. So what does that look like? And then I'll wrap things up here with I always want to end on like hopeful notes and have a sense of what's going on. So a few different concrete places where I think we're making real strides. So social justice unionism. Okay, teachers unions are very powerful, and I don't think it occurs to a lot of folks generally like how you can wield them in particular ways. You know, I went to Coachella schools to talk about ethnic studies work with them with those teachers, and they have a very bad relationship with the union there. And I was like, well, why don't you just take it over? And it had, like, because what happened in Seattle is like the way they did in Seattle. They took it from Chicago. Before that, is they created a left-wing caucus, a progressive caucus within the union, right? And then what they did is they started running slates of candidates to become the building reps across the district. And then they started infiltrating all the rep assemblies, right? And then because they know how the union works, they start running NBIs. They start running they start putting new like bills and initiatives through the union process to get the union to endorse particular things, right? But because they have the leadership, and then they run a slate for even the president and vice president of the union. They don't necessarily win, but you push the conversation that way. But so in Seattle, because of this left-wing caucus, they're able to do things like get the union to, for instance, the last contract when this strike happened, they actually pushed the union and got it into the contract that there would be racial equity teams in schools. So what they also bargained for, they tried to bargain for less testing, which they weren't able to get, but they also bargained, and they're trying to bargain for more recess time as well. So imagine what position that put the district in. The administration was arguing for fewer race equity teams and for less recess, right? And so and part of that, I don't want to say this wasn't like a sneaky tactic, but it's to understand that a good progressive union recognizes that education is about all these things around the quality of education, not just about the pay, which is real, and class size, which is also real, right? But these things are all about quality education. You want quality educators. You want a quality experience. So I told that to the Coachella folks, and he was like, "Wow, I didn't even think we could do that. Like, I didn't realize that was possible." And he's like, "We need to start thinking about that, you know." And so there's a real space for how we can do this work with unions, and we're seeing it right now, right? You know, the Chicago Teachers Union was really the spark of it for everybody, I think, you know, from a few years ago. But I know that, you know, MTA has been real active here, right, for several years, doing stuff around charters and around testing and funding. We had the Red State Revolt from last year, the sort of the teacher spring, strikes last spring, when all of these sort of Republican, you know, super conservative states, the entire state struck. Teachers all, I mean, think about that. It's amazing, right? And we can have a whole other conversation, probably over drinks, about the nature of those strikes. But they struck, you know? And it takes, like, you have to understand, by and large, teachers are conservative, not necessarily politically. I think they're more sort of liberal, culturally, but they're conservative because they're professionals. And professionals have a hard time saying no to administration. So when teachers decide to strike and say no to administration, it's actually really important, right? They're taking a step. And what that does is it builds things for the future, because what's happened now is as these strikes have rolled out, teachers around the country are going, you know, we can do this. And then you saw it, like Oakland just went out, right? We had Denver, Los Angeles, UTLA went out. You know, like it's amazing. Like teachers starting to see, as there's a mass consciousness right now of teachers, I think they can understand that striking is a real possibility, and it's actually effective at getting things moving. Yeah, Eric Blank has a book called Red State Revolt. That's about the state teacher strikes. So that's worth checking out. Or Blanc, probably. Is other spaces where things are going. Ethnic studies is a real movement right now. Okay, K-12 ethnic studies. I mean, is a whole different movement from the higher education ethnic studies work that was happening back in the late '60s and early '70s. This is teachers and students and parents and community members protesting at the Seattle School Board meeting to get ethnic studies. In Seattle, we had an amazing thing. We've had the NAACP education chair, NAACP, started pushing for ethnic studies and working with us on that. And then they organized an NAACP youth coalition as well to start working on that. And we've had teacher activists doing this. And we were able to get the district to endorse ethnic studies for the whole district. Okay. Now there's complications with it, but we have official sanction to ethnic studies, including a full-time staff person in the admin who's helping push the ethnic studies work across the district. Here's Providence, students are protesting as well. And just a quick shameless plug, our new book just came out, just like within the last 2 months, basically. This is me, Tolteca Quatin, Miguel Zavala, and Christine Sleater doing a Rethinking Schools Ethnic Studies book with a beautiful cover. Yeah. Ricardo Levins Morales is an amazing artist, and so we're just so happy about that. Okay, to wrap up, I'm going to take us back to Seattle, though. So where I left it last was we had the attack, and we did the thing. We had the threat, and we did the protest anyways. Okay. I just want you to understand a little bit about where that led to, so we can sort of be here. So here's a press conference we called, and at this point, what happened was the threat happened, and the union, because of the Progressive Caucus in the union, they pushed the union to both endorse their support for the John Muir teachers, and then also start taking actions towards making a district-wide Black Lives Matter at School Day. Okay. And then what happened, you'll see right here, here's Rita Green. She was the NAACP education chair. She, of course, was on board with this, was supporting us, so we had NAACP support. And then right here, you can't see her, this is Sabrina Burr. She was the president of the Seattle Citywide Executive PTSA. And so then the PTSA endorsed the Black Lives Matter at School Day, right? And so here we had the union, right? And the parents and community members coming together as activists to push a Black Lives Matter School Day in response to what happened in Muir. All right, it was really beautiful. And then I should find their email. I still remember. Suddenly we got an email from Seattle Schools, from the superintendent at the time, and it was amazing. My jaw hit the floor. they actually endorsed the Black Lives Matter in School Day. The district came out and endorsed it. They were feeling so much pressure from us doing the media stuff and building this coalition that the district said, oh, this is part of our race equity work. And suddenly they gave us their blessing. Couldn't believe it. And so then we had parents, teachers union, community activists, and the district administration supporting Black Lives Matter at school. It didn't come off perfect. I mean, imagine doing any district-wide anything. We had teams building curriculum, right? We had events happening in different schools. Some schools did it, some schools didn't do it at all. Some schools did it poorly when they did do it. Some schools did it great, right? And there was tension, as I talked about earlier. Some of the white parents in some of the schools got upset about it. But we did this thing, right? Like it was a district-wide action. And it was super powerful. So here's on the steps of Garfield High School, a bunch of the staff and community members out there. And for that day that we did district-wide, we made T-shirts. Individual schools made their own T-shirts. We ended up selling about 3,000 T-shirts across the district, right? Which is basically like covers most of the teachers in the district. It was kind of amazing. I mean, T-shirts are just T-shirts, right? I get it. But they're also symbolic, right? When teachers are willing to say that, to have all these teachers saying Black Lives Matter, it was really important and really powerful. And then in Seattle, it's grown in a couple ways. So that's Jesse Agopi on the left. That's Michael Bennett, former Seattle Seahawk and current Philadelphia Eagle linebacker. And that's Macklemore on the right, who's from Seattle, graduated Seattle Public Schools. Jesse's he's working for Bennett, and he had some connections to Macklemore's people just in the Seattle sort of activist and art scene. Amazingly, with my help, even though I'm not mentioned here, we were able to pitch to Macklemore's people to actually give a bunch of money to contribute to buy books for Seattle teachers. And then Bennett's people got involved too, right? And so suddenly we had these two they basically bought 800 copies of Teaching for Black Lives for every middle and high school social studies and language arts teacher in Seattle schools, right? And so like we were waiting for the district on any of this. We're like, okay, we're just going to go ahead and get this rolling, right? So again, just showing what happens as we build this stuff, right? And we're fortunate to have these connections, but here we are, we just keep it pushing, keep it pushing, keep it pushing. How can we continue to push? And so of course, you have to know, if there's one thing my man Jesse knows, is the power of a press conference. Anytime you do something, call a press conference, right? Get it in the media and start rolling it out. Make people respond to it, okay? So yeah, amazing thing, we had that going. And then we started we've been doing professional development because we know these teachers have the books. And so now it's like, okay, now we can do a district-wide PD on Teaching for Black Lives and tell people to bring their books, right? And so we've been working with the ethnic studies staff around that. And then more recently, Macklemore was let me go back to Macklemore. A lot of people hate on Macklemore. I'll take the hip hop break right here. A lot of people hate on Macklemore. He's a white guy who popped off super big and sort of made his name in hip hop. And now I don't even call him, he's not really hip hop anymore. He's just a pop artist and the stuff he's doing now. What I'll say about Macklemore is this: he's been grinding in Seattle forever. He was never aimed to be a pop artist. He's been putting out records forever. He's always had politics. And he's put his money where his mouth is for us, right? I mean, he's just given us money to do this work, and he's done that locally with other folks as well. And so, regardless of how you feel about him as an artist, he's actually taking some of his monies and he's using it in ways that I think are really powerful and important. So that's my Macklemore defense. And then ongoing, he liked the book so much that recently, this just happened. He put out a whole thing where he would match districts up to $10,000 total for people who wanted to buy copies of Teaching for Black Lives. So he wanted to do something more national. So again, just to see how this thing grows, right? We just keep pushing the racial justice work. Like you just have to keep building those networks and keep pushing the conversation, and you don't know where it's going to lead. This I would have never thought. And then people might argue with me, but I really think Seattle was the first district to do a district-wide like Black Lives Matter Day at school. And I think that really became a core thing for the national movement. And this is from the national. And so now is the National Teaching for Black Lives Week. Okay? We got snowed out this year, unfortunately. We were like 3.5 of our days, or 2.5 of our days got snowed out in Seattle. But these are the national demands: and zero tolerance, mandate Black history and ethnic studies, hire more Black teachers, and then they added fund counselors, not cops, right? Which is particularly important in light of the most recent study that found that there's like thousands of schools in this country who have police and no counselors, right? But it really grew into, like, it really contributed to this national thing. And so folks in Philly and Chicago and LA and Boston probably, I mean, there's like all over the country, folks are pushing to do Black Lives Matter in School Week and sort of build a national movement around this, all right? And, you know, it's all just through people's activism, okay, and doing this work and understanding that racial justice can't just be just on curriculum in schools, right? But it's got to be parents and teachers and the unions and kids and community activists sort of working together to push this conversation. All right, now I'm done talking.